Welcome to the Story Talks Back. Almost everything that we remember, think about, or imagine is a story. Stories entertain us, inform us, and even define us. They have upsides, and they have downsides. This podcast explores the power of story in every aspect of our lives. I'm Dave Stanton. Thank you for joining us. Born in 1917, Ruth Lisa Schechter was an American poet, editor, teacher, and activist. Raised in the Bronx, she studied with Louise Bogan and published 10 volumes of candid, meticulously crafted verse. In the 1960s, she became active in the women's rights and anti-Vietnam War movements, taking part in benefit readings and protests. After moving north to Croton-on-Hudson, New York, she founded the Croton Review and the Croton Council on the Arts, winning numerous grants and establishing the Review as a presence on the literary scene. Schechter was also a pioneer in poetry therapy, the use of verse writing to explore and heal emotional trauma. With her husband Jerry, she raised 2 boys, Daniel, now deceased, and William, and was grandmother to Ethan, Jamie, and Sarah. Schechter died in 1989 at age 72. Okay, well, it's great to welcome everybody to this remembrance and celebration of Ruth Lisa Schechter. And I'm here with a really wonderful group of people who knew her very well. And I want to introduce them from the lower right. Bill Schechter, younger son of Ruth and Jerry Schechter, taught history in the Massachusetts public school system for 35 years. He's the author of Bringing History Home, a classroom teacher's quest to make the past matter. Maria Mazziotti Gillan, a longtime friend and colleague of Ruth's, has published more than 20 books on or about poetry. Her collection, All That Lies Between Us, won an American Book Award in 2008. She's also the founder and executive director of the Poetry Center at Passaic County Community College in Paterson, New Jersey, and she edits the Paterson Literary Review. She's also a gifted visual artist whose watercolor paintings and collages have been widely praised. And Maureen Seaton, a friend and student of Ruth's, has written or co-authored over 20 poetry collections. She won a Lambda Literary Award for her memoir, Sex Talks to Girls, and is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Miami in Coral Gables. So thank you all for joining us. This is really a wonderful group of people and friends, and this is a great thing for me and for Ruth, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah.
So to make sure that Ruth has a clear say in this session, I thought I would share a video of her, which is of her reading at the 1987 New York Book Fair. And I actually was in the room at this reading. I'm not sure if either of you were, or any of you were, I don't think so. But this is by 10 Penny Players. Richard Spiegel has given us permission to include this in the tribute. So I'm going to play this now.
That they will be in my forthcoming, who knows when, new and selected poems. One is called Marriage. If truth be known, dear Austin, I married my muse. A paradoxical blessing. I'm strange, even to myself. I spoke through my life. A loaded gun that stood like a riddling stanza, bullet after bullet, my letter to the world, released without a shot in Amherst. I buried each spring in deeper images of rage, a crucifix locked between gender and genre, a way of being the way I was, a perverse Cinderella in 19th century America. Rumors about my death or madness were invented in 1856. My mind never weakened, as myths declare. I chose the underground to marry my muse. I withdrew to seek my freedom. My love and I were often lost in thorns and vines, twisted and obscure metaphor. At 26, I was still the infant child, flying with birds, and saw my future, some odd zero blurred in sky. I could not stop for death, nor could I stop then for his requirement, yet the funeral persisted in my brain. I left my child's body, not easily, to liberate the woman, no more to hide, and survive many deaths. My life, a loaded gun, shot out its poems in mysteries of solitude I serve within my own dominions. I'm going to read some new poems because I want to try them out.
Oh, wow.
She had such energy.
Right.
I said she had such energy.
I know. No, I heard you. Yeah.
That was
So, Bill, I thought maybe as a good starting point, you could just give us the background on your mom. I know you wrote a really beautiful little essay sort of story about her childhood.
Okay, and stop. If I go on too long, just stop, because I know our time is limited. Just watching that piece, one reaction immediately was, and I'll go into her background. She didn't actually, her diction as a mother was quite different. You know, my mother had a theatrical side to her before she became a poet. I'll talk about that a little bit, but well, she really declaimed. It was kind of amazing to see her reinvent herself on the stage of whatever club she was reading a poem in. And the other immediate reaction I had was, oh God, I wish he hadn't smoked. You know, my family had a terrible relationship with smoking, and it took a terrible toll. Anyway, the consciousness that she grew up with, the 30s and 40s, is not the consciousness about health that, you know, we have today. So anyway, my mother was the daughter of an immigrant woman who was barely literate in any language. I mean, she could speak 2 languages, 3 languages, my grandmother, but she was not a learned, educated person. Her father, I believe, was also an immigrant, but he played almost no role in her life. He was not a very responsible person, came home one day to find my grandmother had packed his bags, and he basically left the home and left my mother's life, only to surface maybe 30 years later, very, very briefly. So my mother was an only child who was also the child of a single mother. She came of age during the Great Depression. She was born in 1917. So when she was in high school, that would be right in the middle of the Great Depression. And as a result, she worked her entire life. She did graduate from James Monroe High School, a commercial course, which probably was a good investment in terms of getting jobs as a typist in law offices, and later worked her whole life in hospitals as a secretary, you know, writing poems, hiding them under her desk blotter. So she never had the opportunity to go to college. Neither did my father. His younger brother was the only person in our family who went to college, CCNY, before my brother and I went to college. So my mother and father were largely self-educated. That is to say, they came from, while my grandmother was not literate, the community they were a part of was a very literate Jewish working class community. My mother had a friend in the law office in which she worked in the Bronx, and that's my grandmother originally emigrated to Boston because that's where her brother lived, and that's where she got married. But they later moved to New York City, to the Bronx. My mother grew up behind the Loewy's Paradise Theater near Fordham Road in the Bronx, if you're familiar with that area. And she had this friend in the law office who somehow connected my mother and father. My father was a real radical and was a member of the Young Socialist League and the Workmen's Circle. And he brought my mother into that world. Although my mother definitely had political concerns, she was not a 30s revolutionary, so to speak. And they got married in 1939, despite the best efforts of my grandmother to prevent my father from dating her, stuffing the bell button in downstairs in the apartment. They had a torrid courtship and they got married. And then my brother was born 1942. At a certain point, my father went into the army, came out in the late 40s. I was born 1946. And during that period, I think my mother, I should backtrack 1 second. She always had an interest in books and writing. And in fact, I'm going to hold up here a medal that she won at, I think, PS10. I don't think she was a high school student yet. She wrote an essay on patriotism. Beautiful handwriting. And I never really examined the medal before today. And it says, one flag, one country, the Loyalty League. This was a real right-wing anti-immigrant organization. I'm sure my mother didn't know and my grandmother didn't know, and the teacher just encouraged all the kids to write an essay and so on. So proud possession. And so she did have that background. She loved to escape into books and old English poetry and mythologies, and enjoyed writing, clearly. There's a picture of her. I didn't know how to introduce media into this, but the large picture of her at PS10, a graduation photo. All the girls are sitting in tears and they're all looking straight ahead like wooden figures. And my mother is holding the hand in maybe the third row of what had to be the most bookish looking girl in the graduating class. And unlike everybody else who's seated looking straight at the camera, my mother's body is kind of twisted and holding this girl's hand and at the edge of her seat, and just clearly excited to move into the next stage of life. In terms of my mother's poetry, I know she wrote some poems, pretty literal poems, kind of social realistic poems for our cooperative housing project newsletter in the late 40s. At some point in the 40s, there was a terrible mine disaster, and my mother wrote a poem about that. And, she wrote a few other poems, and mainly she'd write little ditties on your birthday card or the cards of friends when they had a birthday. Nothing too serious. And I'll pretty much stop after this, and if people have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But I would say, and by the way, she was a wonderful mother, very attentive. Little did I know she hated cooking. I loved her little meatballs and spaghetti. Um, and, she would come home after a day's work and make dinner for us and take care of us and hold our hands when we were sick. And in those days, I became very close to my father the last 30 years of his life. But at that time, the 40s and 50s, fathers were just kind of different than they're expected to be today. He was more distant. He was exhausted from work, from the garment shops, working 6 days a week. My mother was pretty much in charge of the household. My father would occasionally fix things, quickly for neighbors, more slowly for us. My mother would have to get after him. But I would say late 50s, early 60s, my mother really went through a personal crisis. Started seeing a therapist, was very depressed. And I'm convinced now, looking back on this, that a big part of the problem is that the women's movement wouldn't come until 1970. And she was in her own way grappling with the problem, which was a very personal problem at the time. It didn't seem like a collective problem, a problem of social dimensions. I'm the mother of 2 wonderful boys. My husband's a decent man. Why aren't I happy? Why am I depressed? Why am I really sad? And it just wasn't enough for her because she had this creative energy inside of her that demanded expression. And when she began demanding slowly through the 60s, kind of more space and more freedom, going downtown to either attend classes or poetry readings, created a tension in my parents' relationship because my father took it personally, why aren't I enough? If it was 1970, everybody would understand what the problem was. I mean, we're still grappling with this issue, but, I think women have much more freedom and much more of an expectation that they have a right to develop their creative potential. But back then, she was waging a tremendous struggle that, I could really feel the tension in the house as much as I tried to support her. I was dealing with my own adolescent high school world. And she was just desperate, hungry for this kind of freedom. And then with the Vietnam War, she became involved in, Artists Against the War and organizing poetry, readings against the war. And there was some context for this creative expression. We lived in a progressive Jewish community, cooperative housing project. But I think most of the women in the community, with some exceptions, were conventional Jewish housewives. In fact, there was one woman who I guess for my mother really epitomized conventionality. Her name was Ida Jacobson. And whenever my parents would have a fight, my mother would say to my father, you should have married Ida Jacobson, and that was sometimes it evoked a laugh and sometimes it just evoked a fight. Because this was a world that my father could not enter. My father didn't like it when people closed doors. And my mother really needed space. And we moved to another apartment in the Amalgamated where she could actually have a little bit of a study, but he kind of resented that. But I'll just end by saying this, because you all knew her as poets. I knew her as my mother, that my mother, with her incredible energy, always busy, always involved in something, really launched three people into their own creative orbits. My brother, just to put a little flesh on that theatricality, my mother was very active in our community, working in the nursery school, and she participated in the production of Shalom Aleichem plays, all women casts, all the women, none of the women could speak Yiddish, but none of them could read Yiddish, transliterated scripts they would have to memorize. And my mother would be out there on the stage singing and whatever. So when I saw that little clip, I know it didn't just start at that reading, that she enjoyed performance before that. But she launched my brother, probably who really assimilated a lot of her dynamic energy, was very project oriented, as was my mother. To the day my brother died, and still today for me, our walls look the same as the walls of her study. We have posters up and all kinds of pictures. Empty wall space is like, a sin. He certainly launched me into writing, encouraging me to write poetry, me trying to tell her, Mom, I'm not like you. I can write an occasional poem, but I don't have to write. Until several years down the road, I did have to write, and wrote a lot of poems. Do not compare to the master, but they were the best that I could do. And even my father was really transformed by her. What it required was him losing his leg and having to quit the garment business, which was a real drag of a business to be in, that my father stayed in after the Great Depression in order to organize the workers. He was very political. Unfortunately, he's the only one who got organized into really, a kind of dismal working life. And my mother introduced him to the possibilities of sculpture, and he became a passionate sculptor in his last years. He was just starting during the last years of my mother's life. So, she took care of us. She launched us. She found time to do her own work and writing. Just an incredibly dynamic person. Wherever she was, she broadcast seeds of one kind or another. In Little Croton, she started the Croton Review and the Croton Council on the Arts. It was just in her nature to do that. So
right.
That's my mother's background.
It's wonderful. Maria, do you remember how you met Ruth?
Yes, I do, very much so. Ruth was a very important figure in my life, actually. I sent poems to the Croton Review, and Ruth wrote me a note and said, I'd really like you to come to see me. And I was a typical sort of 1950s housewife. I was an adjunct too in teaching in colleges, but in many ways I was a very conventional kind of person. And I never went anywhere without my husband. So Ruth said, come to see me. So I drove to Croton, which was a big deal for me because that seemed like very far away for me. And I got to Croton and I met your mother, and we sat in her study and we sat together for about 5 hours. That had such a generosity Ruth had, that it was as though she couldn't help but give away part of herself to other people and to encourage other people. And she said things that really helped me to see where I was going wrong in my own poetry. And she said, go back and reread Allen Ginsberg's Kaddish and look at the kind of details he uses. No, his mother could be nobody else's mother. And so when you write about your father, it has to be your father, not anybody else's father. It can't be a generic father. It has to be very specific. And I drove home from her house thinking about what she told me. And it took me about 4 years to fix that poem. So that it ended up winning a lot of prizes, actually. I'm not saying I must thank Ruth for that. But because she really taught me to think, look, Ginsberg, when he did Kaddish, would you ever forget that bus ride he took with his mother who was raving, taking her to the madhouse, his father sending him with 17 years old with his mother to take her to the madhouse. You want to say, what the hell is wrong with you? But you never forget Ginsberg's mother. And I think the same is true in Ruth's poems. There's a specificity in them. There's a liveliness in them. I always remember coming to her house. We became very good friends. And I would drive up. This was a big deal for me. I would drive up to Croton and we would have dinner or lunch. And then I'd probably lunch because I probably would have been afraid to drive home in the dark. And I've been all over the world since then. But I was a real little chicken, little Italian housewife. And so I was thinking all the way home about what she had told me. And I tried to revise my poem so that it would fit in with what she was telling me had to be done to make it really alive and really specifically my own. I remembered that she had these capes that she would wear. Do you remember the capes?
Yeah.
She would come in with these red capes, and she was always very dramatic and very full of life and very full of laughter. And
The big jewelry.
What?
The big jewelry.
The big jewelry, yes. I mean, you could not ignore Ruth. And she started the Croton Review. She brought people together for readings for the Croton Review. I think that's where I met Maureen the first time. And she seemed to me to be full of vibrancy and really intelligent and sharp, and knew what she wanted to do and did it, even though that was not the thing to do then. You have to realize how much time has passed. I'm now 80, don't tell anybody. But, you know, when you realize that, I was growing up in the 40s and 50s. She was growing up in the 30s and 40s. It was a whole different world for women. Women didn't go do things. You know, for me to go out, my husband got sick with Parkinson's disease 25 years before he died, and he's been dead 11 years. When he got sick, I had to make a decision. Was I going to just stay home, or was I going to continue to do what I'd been doing, go out and do poetry readings, go all over the world doing poetry readings, or was I going to stay home? So I didn't stay home. I, in fact, got another job teaching at SUNY Binghamton and became a full professor at SUNY Binghamton at the same time that I was running the Poetry Center. And then I did a lot of readings and a lot of visiting professorships at different schools before I got a full professorship at SUNY Binghamton. And it meant I had to leave Dennis, my husband, behind in many ways. And I think he found that quite threatening. That one time I remember I was pulling out of the driveway and he's looking like a sack in the driveway, like, oh God, she's leaving again. But I felt that I had to save what I'd worked so hard to get for myself, which was this kind of independence, this ability to live a life that was satisfying. I know just what you mean about Ruth and what she wanted, because it's not that you don't love your children. I love my children to death. I love my grandchildren. I love my husband. But I hate to say it sounds so terrible, but it really wasn't enough. I needed something that was just for me. So Ruth taught me that that was okay, that it was okay to want something just for yourself, and that when she started that magazine, the Croton Review, she really worked very hard on it, and it gave me the idea to start my own magazine. So I started my own magazine. I set up poetry readings. She set up poetry readings all the time. She tried to get people together to meet people so that they could form relationships and help one another with their work, and also help one another to get better known as poets. I want to read just a little bit of one of Ruth's poems, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it's called What Were You Patching? Needling, threading, nighttime sewing machine from Odessa to Massachusetts. Ma, were you patching the world? Dead in your bed now, accurate as medical photography. Your arm is curved in grace, serene in rigor mortis, and hair like moons of silver. How do I pack up the house of your life? This inventory, so enormous, open papers, cartons like mouths at my throat, offering no anesthesia while my eyes sink in the worst procedure, following the coffin with its Jewish star. Driven to a lawn of cedar trees, I think you draped inside the brightest red shawl and dress, save for special events, barefoot with others, yet your posture clings to boxes of buttons, pins, stockings, and shoes outlining your walk. Your medicine checks of aspirin, milk of magnesium, blue bottles where half your teeth still soak, saying nothing in a yellow coffee cup. Ma, how do I arrange my new maturity? Do I arrange these details, the endless notebooks from English classes? How do I arrange the 3 branches of government you memorized for my country's correct answers, studying citizenship, studying respect? And what do I do with aluminum pots scrubbed in communion of polished and plants watered in Russian history with your stubborn desire to learn the syntax of America, wrapped by your attachment to love, trapped by hugs and kisses on needlepoint, trapped in chromosomes, trapped in passports from Odessa? My head freezes in your refrigerator, packed with food. Ma, what were you passing? How do I answer forms in triplicate? Government departments want to know you. You become everybody's statistic now, while I carry your death certificate in my purse these days. The windows you cleaned last week for Passover shine along Van Cortlandt Park, blinding me like knives. The plants you watered and watered dry. I keep wishing they'd die, wishing like a child you'd suddenly arrive, ringing my doorbell, demanding I'd be home on the spot, demanding your red tam o' shanter, demanding in your bifocal glasses, demanding what life is really about in the coolest week of April. Dying in secrets of Tolstoy, secrets of stanzas I search, shaped in visions of your face on pillows of work that hurt like a cottage. I stumble on, scratching, goose feathers across my eyelids, open now even in sleep. Ma, what were you patching? Is that an amazing poem? And I always read it to my students. I always start crying. I read it, and tears would be running down my face, because I think she did in that poem just what she was trying to tell me to do. This could be nobody else's mother but hers. Right. And in a way, it's almost as though she's describing herself, because that's what I think of her as, this presence, this. She wasn't a tall woman, I don't think, but I'm a very short woman, so perhaps I don't remember correctly. But she was a big woman in other ways. She was big in spirit, big in desire, big in wanting to grab onto life and not let go. And I feel that her mother must have been the same way. They might not have had opportunities that were given to other people, but she formed opportunities for herself. And watching her mother struggle, I think she decided she was going to do something more than that. She certainly did. She influenced a lot of people. She changed a lot of people's lives. She certainly changed my life. And I miss her to this day.
Beautiful. Maureen. How are you doing?
I'm pretty emotional right now, so
I could tell.
I really am. I'm not sure.
Can I just say something while you
I
pull yourself together?
That poem was about the grandmother I was closest to. She lived across the street from us. And it was for her that my parents were moving out of the city to get a house that had an in-law apartment.
Downstairs, I remember it.
Yes, and she died just before I think they had already gotten the house, but obviously, life intervened and she wouldn't be able to make that journey with my mother. Yeah, I know that poem well. One thing I want to say, just because you kind of spoke about your academic career, one of the things that my mother really struggled with was the fact that she wasn't able to get a college education.
She didn't need one. She was
No,
brilliant.
yeah, I felt the same way, but she felt a sense of inferiority about that, and that sense of inferiority was amplified by some people in the academy, not what you called it, the academy, university poets, who would kind of look down on people. I don't have a specific incident to relate, but who would generally look down on people who, didn't find their home in the university. And she took a lot of courses with a lot of great poets, but that really dogged her and really made me aware as she was indomitable. It made her feel awful. It made her feel inferior, but she kept pushing onward at the same
She
time.
kept growing.
She didn't allow it to defeat her at all. But it was at that time that I became aware that my romantic view of the world of poetry was a little naive, that the world of poets is not necessarily the kindest world.
No.
Everybody's very ego invested. Everybody's trying to get published. She forged on, let's just say.
Yeah.
She
Maureen.
made a space for herself, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
And the thing with academic poets is that they tend to think only something is incomprehensible is poetry.
Yeah.
And I spent my whole life fighting against that.
Yeah.
Within academia.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's important for those of us who are in academia to call out these people and their snobbishness and their elitist tendencies and their desire to make literature something that's always only for 5 people. Ruth and I agreed, literature is for everybody.
Well, I think it's gotten a little bit better. Maybe it's still maybe
still very cutthroat.
Yeah. At any rate,
Maureen, I wanted to ask you, how did you meet Ruth?
I have to get up and go close that
okay, sure.
thing behind me because there's a rainbow that's shining right in my eye.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Take me a second, I promise.
One sec.
There was a little snippet my mother had on her bulletin board from a woman I never met. But it said something like, it was like the beginning of a tribute to my mother. And it said, Ruth Lisa Schechter, ... I actually never met her. She happened to me. I thought that was great.
Maureen, is that what happened to you?
No.
Boy, it's sure happening to me today. This is like amazing. Thank you so much, Bill and Maria, and of course, Dave, for organizing us into this little group. I'm still emotional. It's going to be a little bit hard for me to talk, I think, but I knew I loved her, but this is like, whoa, just hearing all of this and bringing it all up for me. And, I'm feeling more grateful than I can express, really, to her and her memory. Maria, she loved the hell out of you. All I heard about her. I heard about you from like day one with her. I was always talking about you. So when I finally met you, it was like, what a thrill, and still a thrill, actually. And her boys, I did hear about her boys too. So lucky all of you, and lucky me. We're talking about feminism and all this other stuff. I got married at age 20, had 2 kids all through the 70s, missed everything. I missed Woodstock. I was sad about the war. I was just in my, wifeness. And and so when he left me at when I was 30, it was like, what? really a shock, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me, obviously. Well, not obviously, but it was. And I immediately didn't know what was going to happen. Had never written a check in my entire life, like things like that. It was really, crazy. And through a long series. See, this is Dave, why I don't remember anything about this period. It was like crazy custody fight. I mean, it was just, everything was insane. And so I moved to Croton on Hudson. Somewhere, I moved all over the place. I moved out to Chicago. I moved to, we were in Tarrytown, Ossining, up and down the river. But I finally moved to Croton on Hudson with a boyfriend who is not living anymore. But I had started writing poetry the minute my husband left. The minute I just started writing. And someone said to me, that's too short. You're not going to get that into a woman's magazine as a short story. That's a poem. And I was like, oh, kill me now. I just had nothing. It was crazy. And I hadn't at that point, I hadn't graduated from college yet. I quit college to get married. Anyway, long story. So I'm in Croton on Hudson. I'm writing like crazy. I mean, really, it just was like pouring out of me. I used to go to Senasqua Park, my favorite place in the world, and write little snippets, go across the bridge, go home and, do what I needed to do as a girlfriend at that point and a mother. And someone said, have you ever heard of the Croton Review? I don't know who said that, but it was all over town too. It was like kind of she was famous and, among, I guess I went to the library a lot. I'm not sure how I first heard about Ruth, but I do know that at some point I called her and I said, do you ever take on students? I started writing a couple of years ago, and I've had no guidance. I'm not going to go to school for it. And she was like, come see me. So she took me into her study,
Right.
um,
Love study.
and it was perfect. It was like, it really was, I've experienced relationships with my own students since then many times, and we just clicked. We really clicked, and I loved her. And she was the first person who said, yes, you are a poet. I didn't know if I was. And then she proceeded to see me once a week. I'm not sure how long I went to her. It was probably a couple of years. I got involved in the Croton Review. I was a reader for the Croton Review, and discovered that there's a lot of different kinds of poetry out there. I'd never studied poetry. I was an English major in college, but I was also a psychology major, which I thought I was, but I didn't really, I don't know. I was never an academic. I'm in academia, but I'm not an academic. In fact, I have some poems about that, but because I know exactly what you mean. I recognized in Ruth somebody who was going to help me write like myself. I wanted my own. She was there to help my voice come through.
Right.
And I didn't even know I had a voice, much less, was it academic? What was it? I had no idea. It took me another 10 years before I needed to get an MFA, because I was told by the school where I was teaching, not where I am now, somewhere in Chicago, that if I got an MFA, I could teach advanced poetry workshops. And I was like, how do I do that? I want to do that. I loved teaching. I found that out. So I went to a low res program, which I'm sure Ruth would have just loved. It was meant for moms. It was meant for women and men who had other things to do besides go to college, which I hadn't done. Anyway.
Sorry, my phone.
Oh,
Telemarketers. I'm on every damn sucker list.
I know. Me too. So the three things I wanted to say that she gave me, I wrote them down, were fearlessness in my writing. She really she insisted on it. She insisted on it. And I did it. I did it for her. And she also insisted on originality, which Maria talked a little bit about, like, it's your mother, it's my mother, it's mine. And I had a few images thrown in there, and she was like, no, no, no. How can you say that in a different way? You're a poet. And I'm like, really? Like, okay. And then I would go home and I would just work on these metaphors or images, whatever they were. And I don't know why I didn't know that, but she just helped me with that, and I did it for her. The last thing, well, she gave me a lot aside from that too, but the last thing I remember about what she gave me for my writing, I was putting together a manuscript, which for my first book, which she basically was there for through the whole thing. And I brought the manuscript to her, and she said, why are these like really brave poems toward the back? Why aren't they at the beginning? And I said, because I don't want people to be turned off by my harshness or my courage, or whatever. She said, no, they go at the beginning. You put the hard ones at the beginning. And honestly, after all the books that I've written at this point, I never forget that. And I tell my students that I've passed on everything I've learned from her to my own students. And of course, I dedicated my first book to her as well. But, this has just been a great opportunity for me. I loved her, and she was one of the kindest people I've ever met in my life as well. I just want to say that, because I know she comes across as this, like, I'm tough, and she had that, which I needed. But there was a kindness and a love she loved poetry. She loved people. She wanted to help people, and she did. She really
Yes, certainly did.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Sure, I know you've been working on a kind of a collaboration with her.
Did
I want to be sure to have you read that because it's so nice.
Well, in her book Speedway, which is one of my favorites of hers, she has a book a poem for Emily Dickinson, and it's called Perhaps Emily. It's one of my favorites. I mean, I love all of these, but it's in memory of Emily Dickinson, and every line starts because, and I decided that I asked her spirit, if it would be okay if I collaborated with her on this. So I did last week, and the way the poem works out is the first part of the whole thought or sentence is Ruth, because blah, 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 blah. And then I finish it. And then I do another because, and I do this for 14 lines. So it's like a pseudo sonnet, which I like better than real sonnets, sometimes real sonnets. And that's a Ruth thing too. And so it's both of us. And I call it a collaboration because without her lines, it never would have existed for me. So I hope she likes it. Here it is. It's called Perhaps Ruth, a collaboration with Ruth Lisa Schechter and her poem, Perhaps Emily. Because a continent can be a single tree, a single page can be a continent. Because the landscape listens, I stand beside the river and hear the sound of listening. Because blue jays arrive in pairs, the male jay keens beside his fallen mate. Because your songs return with blackberries, they sustain me through winter after winter. Because your apple trees turn into pageants, the one outside my window dresses up like Emily in white. Because the Japanese maple astonishes me, I am astonishable, my heart the unequivocal earth. Because your poems endure like the Hudson, I wave to you from Senasqua, where my daughters will send my ashes back to the sea.
Wow.
Wonderful.
Gorgeous.
Is that poem published yet?
I just wrote it.
Okay, would you like to send it to the Patterson Literary Review? I'd love to publish.
Of course, I would be honored. I would be so honored. Thank
Right,
you.
send it to me by email.
Okay, I have your email. Thank you.
I love it.
That's so sweet.
That's brilliant.
wouldn't have written it without this
Hmm.
Yeah.
get together for Ruth or with
Awesome.
Ruth. So
Was one more thing I wanted to mention was the idea of poetry therapy was something that she was very invested in, and I really haven't heard that much about it recently. I mean, does anybody have any idea if that's something that continued after her, or what the
I
context of
think
that
it
was?
does. I think at the time it was kind of revolutionary.
yeah.
And now
Right.
it's been incorporated in a lot of recovery programs of different kinds.
Hmm.
I found somewhere in my mother's papers just yesterday, I was looking through a woman who had been involved in Odyssey House, who was a client struggling with substance abuse, who talked about the impact of my mother's poetry therapy on her and
Hmm.
how really a decisive factor in her recovery.
Wow.
So that was great to read. By the way, I know David had sent out the link to my mother's website, which, by the way, was a challenge to put together because there were no digital files that my mother had. My mother was
Pre-digital.
great on the IBM Selectric. I think that's as far as she went. Typewriter, but she never worked on a computer. So all those poems that are on that website, everything had to be scanned as a picture. At any rate, one of the sections on that website is called Tributes. And after she passed away, a number of friends sent various prose and poetic tributes, and we put them together in a little booklet. You can see it there. Some really fine poems.
Hmm.
I just found the other day a poem. Did you guys know Elsa Colligan? Very close friend of my mother's.
I know the name, yeah.
I think actually because of our efforts to try to identify who might participate here, I think she has passed away. Very fine poet, and she sent me two poems. I kind of got back in touch with her a few years ago, and we put a stone tablet. It's like a fundraising thing, but I liked it. A stone tablet at Walt Whitman's birthplace, celebrating their friendship.
Hmm.
She sent me these poems unsolicited 22 years after my mother died, describing her feelings about my mom.
Wow.
At any rate, David, thank you, so much for.
My pleasure.
How did you get to know my mother?
Yeah.
Because I definitely remember your name from those days, this young guy.
I met her at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference in 1982.
Okay.
And, she just, sucked me in, and I never left.
Okay.
I helped her with the
Yeah.
review. I did interviews for the review.
Yeah.
And I had done an interview with John Gardner, the novelist, that year at Bread Loaf. And so she wound up publishing that and other things that I did. So she had a huge impact on me.
Awesome.
There
Her
anything else that you-
papers are all at BU in the Mugar Library. They have a archive of 20th century writers. So that was a great thing to know that her papers would be taken care of, and her books were sent to various libraries, and this website, which is not the most modern looking website, but it is nice to be able to send people a link, and they can have access to her poetry and so on. I know that would have been important to her.
Yeah. Maria and Maureen.
I think this might have been important to her too, because
Oh, absolutely.
to know that your memory lives on in
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and that what you did influenced them and influenced their lives and influenced their work would be very important to her.
Oh,
I
this
think.
could be hugely important. Hugely important. She'd be
I
very.
want her to come here in her red cape,
Yeah.
big jewelry.
Yeah.
I want to there. We went to that diner down the street from your house.
Oh, the Croton Diner.
Diner.
That was like her office away from home.
Yeah.
That's an amazing place.
Yeah. Maria and Maureen, I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Ruth? I know we just sort of scratched the surface, but it was really a beautiful memory about
As my father would say, it's all been said. You know?
So,
My father didn't, you know,
I think I'm good.
he liked ceremonies to be brief. So, but no, but I think in what people said, there were so many layers
Yeah.
that,
I think what we remember about her is her indomitable spirit.
yes.
It was hard to believe that she actually died. And I think people like her don't actually die because they live on in us and in our work. So in our memories and in our work, we're not going to forget Ruth.
Yeah.
She's
Right.
not a person who would be easily forgotten. So I love that about her. And seeing that little film clip made me remember more about her and that kind of energy that came off her. So I feel very fortunate to have known her and to have called her a friend.
You know, at the time of my mother's death, my uncle was critically ill. So we get this call in the early morning. And I just said to my wife, oh, my uncle's died. No, it was my mother.
Hmm.
Oh,
So I flew down to Croton. That was a terrifying flight. And Sandy and the kids were going to join me that Monday. So I came in. She had appointed me literary executor. She already had the boxes pretty much packed for BU. There's still a little work to be done. Trying to get her study together. And as I'm cleaning up her study, I said, you know, this is just not like my mother to have left without leaving me some kind of note. This is I don't know why I would have that expectation. I mean, she was ill before she passed away. She was making a slow recovery. But I was like, no, there has to be a note somewhere here. Could not find the note.
Yeah.
A day later, maybe 2 days later, Sandy and the kids come to Croton. And she says to me, you got a letter from your mother.
she wrote it.
She
Sent it.
wrote the letter the day before she died.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it arrived in Brookline, you know, a couple days later. So I was like, yep, I knew, you know.
That she would leave instructions.
It was like mystical, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I had an expectation that had no justification, you know, no basis. And yet I felt like she will do this. I know her.
Right.
But she would want to make sure it was done right.
Yes, exactly. So, beautiful handwriting, beautiful note. At any rate, it was quite a punctuation mark.
Maureen, did you have one more thing you want to say?
Well, you know, I feel like I want to read every single one of her poems in Speedway to you, you know. But I don't know. I just want to say thank you to Ruth. And I really would not be who I am. Who I am, not where I am, what I am, but who I am if it wasn't for her. That's a pretty big deal.
I think the four of us can join in that sentiment.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I was just going to say that. It's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Really, really appreciate your time today. And
Thanks for pulling this together. This
more
was
than I
really
could have expected. So thank you for making it so special. The Story Talks Back is produced and hosted by Dave Stanton. The music you're hearing now was written and performed by Christopher Daydream. The theme music at the beginning of our show is an excerpt from Play by Merlin Twelfhoven, performed by Kronos Quartet as part of their 50 for the Future series. Please subscribe to The Story Talks Back on Podbean and check us out on Instagram. See you next time.